Okay, so in this class, we talked about To Kill a Mockingbird. And we also talked about In the Heat of the Night. Um, let's go on and talk about the two. And let's discuss what were some key points about each story. So, To Kill a Mockingbird, it was about a girl. She's a little girl. She's about 6 years old, and her name was Scout Finch. And the main story behind her is basically she grew up and she was in Alabama between 1933 and 1935. She was 6 years old when the story started, and about 8 years old when it ended. And her father was a lawyer. However, they grew up poor because her clients were often poor and couldn't pay. And she didn't have a mother. She only had her father and her siblings. And she learned various amounts of lessons as she grew up. So she learned 4 lessons about, putting herself in someone else's shoes, and in a literal sense, to not kill a mockingbird, because, they don't harm anyone. It's almost as if though you're bullying them. And fight, even if you lose, and the world is unfair. So now let's talk about some key points with that. Okay, she's from Alabama. And she's 6 years old, and she's white. Now, one other key point that I want to point out there is that she was often bullied at school for helping, for her father who helped, black folks with their issues, their legal issues. And another thing that I would like to add on that is that her father defended a case that, regardless of the proof, the man was still convicted. And one thing I want to put also is that she grew up with no mother, and her father was a lawyer. Okay. Now let's talk about In the Heat of the Night. Detective Tibbs, he's a black detective, and he's come from Philadelphia, where he was called in to help with a homicide of a rich individual who was killed. And their setting takes place in Sparta, Mississippi, and he was accused of the murder. Originally, when he was actually in the detective's office, he was accused of being their murderer due to his color. And even his co-workers were not very polite to him due to his color. So he faced a lot of racism, which was the opposite of Scout Finch. Because, well, Scout Finch was white. However, her father did help African Americans, and that caused some backlash for her. So basically, there was a murder in this town. That was it was a homicide, and it goes into depth about there was it was almost as if though the murder was framed to fit a certain individual, and so the town often tried to run Detective Tibbs out of town. However, the victim's family felt that he was very knowledgeable and wanted his help on the case. So that's that for that portion. So let's go ahead and write this down. That takes place in Mississippi. He is a black man. He's black, and let's see. He was not wanted in Sparta. He was a detective. Now, that's covering both. Now let's look at the similarities that we can conjure up from these two. They both grew up in a time that there was racism. They were both bullied, much like Scout Finch and Mr. Tibbs. They were both bullied, harassed, much like the Sword. Now, one thing that, yes, Mr. Tibbs was a detective. However, Scout Finch's father, Spartacus, was he was actually a lawyer. So I want to say, they sorry for that. They both had law backgrounds, to a sense, of course. She is a 6-year-old girl. And one thing I also want to add is that they were both able to be of some sort of use to their community at the end, as Mr. Tibbs was able to find the murderer, and Scout Finch was able to move on with her life after the father of the victim from the court case was actually, murdered in self-defense for trying to kill the 2 children while the father was out. So there was some sort of justice in its own form, in my opinion, of course, and my interpretation of the story. So that is how I interpreted these stories, both individual key points as well as the similarities between the two.